There is a pattern that runs through thousands of years of ancient texts and is rarely explained honestly. It's not isolated mythology or disconnected stories. It's a consistent record, present in Mesopotamian manuscripts, the Ethiopian Bible, the Book of Enoch, and apocryphal texts that have been systematically excluded from the Western canon. These texts describe beings who came from the sky, intervened in human history, transmitted forbidden knowledge, and according to these same records, will one day return. The problem isn't that these texts exist. The problem is that they agree too much with each other. And what is recorded in them about the return of these beings is not a promise, it's a warning. Because when you study the details, you realize that this return doesn't mean liberation. It means judgment. And everything that is happening now may be exactly what these texts described as the signs preceding that moment. But the most disturbing revelation is not in what they did when they arrived. It's in the reason why they need to return. And it lies in what happens to those who fail to understand the true nature of this return before it occurs. If you truly want to understand what's behind this narrative, like this video now, comment with the word revelation so the algorithm understands that this type of content needs to be shown to more people. And subscribe to the channel, because what will be explained here isn't taught this way anywhere else. This isn't a modern speculation video. It's a direct analysis of texts that have been preserved for thousands of years and tell a story that most people have never heard in its entirety. The Anunnaki first appear in Sumerian texts from Mesopotamia, dating back more than 4,000 years. They are not described as gods in the abstract sense, but as real beings with specific names, functions, and hierarchies. Anu was the supreme ruler, the one who commanded from the sky. Enlil ruled the earth, making decisions about the destiny of humanity. Enki was responsible for knowledge, wisdom, and the secrets of creation. These names are not allegorical. They appear in administrative lists on clay tablets that record decisions, conflicts, and direct interventions in human life. The word Anunnaki literally means those who came from heaven to earth. It is not a metaphor. It is a literal description. And most importantly, these texts were not written by a single culture. They were preserved by the Sumerians, then by the Akkadians, the Babylonians, and the Assyrians. The narrative remained alive because it was not considered fiction. It was recorded history. But here is the first detail that almost no one explains. These same beings, with different names, appear in the Bible. They appear in the Book of Enoch. They appear in the Ethiopian Apocrypha. And what they do in those texts is exactly the same as what they do in the Mesopotamian records. They descend, they teach, they corrupt. And after that, they are judged. So the question is not whether the Anunnaki are real or mythological. The question is why traditions separated by thousands of kilometers and centuries tell the same story. And why these traditions agree not only on the events, but on the specific details of those events. Ethiopian tradition has preserved the Book of Enoch as part of the canonical Bible to this day. While the West excluded this text in the 4th century during the councils of Laodicea and Carthage, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church has maintained it as sacred scripture uninterruptedly. And within this book is one of the most detailed accounts of the Watchers, the celestial beings who descended to Mount Hermon and took human women as wives. The text is not vague, it gives names. Shemihaza was the leader, the one who convinced the other 200 Watchers to descend with him. Azazel taught men how to make swords, knives, shields, and breastplates. He also taught the production of metals and the use of antimony, precious stones, and dyes. Amazarak taught all the sorcerers and enchanters. Barakiel taught astrology. Kokabiel taught the signs of the stars. Ezekiel taught the knowledge of the clouds. Arakiel taught the signs of the earth. Shamsiel taught the signs of the sun. Sariel taught the course of the moon. Each of these names is precisely recorded in the Ethiopian text. This is not about benevolent divine inspiration. It is about the systematic transfer of knowledge that should not have been given to humanity at that time. And what happened after that, according to Enoch, was complete chaos. Giants were born from these unions. Violence spread throughout the earth, corruption became universal, and God decided to send the flood as a direct response to this corruption. But here is the detail that connects everything. These watchers, these beings who descended, did not act alone. They were part of an organized system, and this system, according to the text, was not completely destroyed. It was contained, imprisoned, but not annihilated. And that is precisely what makes their return a possibility recorded in the apocalyptic texts. Mesopotamian texts speak of something the Anunnaki did that is rarely explained with complete clarity. They didn't just rule humanity, they modified humanity. There is a Sumerian tablet known as Atrahasis that describes how Enki and Ninhursag created humankind by mixing the blood of a god with the clay of the earth. This is not poetic language. It is technical language by the standards of the time. The term used for this process is described as a deliberate and planned operation. The Sumerian word for create in these specific contexts is the same word used for mold or form through direct and material intervention. What does this mean? It means that the Anunnaki did not create humankind from nothing. They modified something that already existed. And the reason they did this, according to the same texts, was explicitly to generate a workforce. Humans were made to serve the gods, to work in the fields, to extract minerals, to perform tasks that the Anunnaki no longer wanted to do. This is not a controversial modern interpretation. That's what's literally written on the tablets. And when you put that next to the book of Enoch, the pattern repeats itself with precision. The Watchers didn't come to uplift humanity spiritually. They came to use it. And the knowledge they transmitted wasn't to liberate man. It was to imprison him in systems of technological and spiritual dependence, metallurgy to make weapons, organized warfare to create conflict, adornments to create vanity, astrology to create dependence on signs, magic to create the illusion of power. Each of these bodies of knowledge generated immediate power, and immediate power generated progressive corruption. But the problem wasn't the knowledge itself. The problem was the source of the knowledge and the timing of the revelation. Because what comes from outside the established divine system always carries unforeseen consequences. Now, the script needs to address something that is almost never discussed with the necessary seriousness. If the Anunnaki and the Watchers are the same beings under culturally different names, then what exactly happened to them after the flood? According to the book of Enoch, they were imprisoned by divine decree. The archangel Michael received the direct order to imprison Shemihaza and his companions under the hills of the earth until the day of judgment and consummation, until the eternal judgment is executed. Azazel was bound hand and foot in Dudael, a desert region, where he would remain covered by rough and sharp stones until the time of final judgment. They were not destroyed. They were not annihilated. They were contained in specific prisons. And this is repeated in Jude verse 6, which speaks of angels who did not keep their own domain but abandoned their proper dwelling place, and who are reserved in eternal chains under darkness until the judgment of the great day. 2 Peter chapter 2 verse 4 repeats the same information independently. These beings have not ceased to exist. They are waiting in specific prisons. And the texts make it clear that there is a specific, determined moment when they will be released. This moment is called judgment. But here is what no one adequately explains. Judgment is not merely punishment carried out from a distance. It is the execution of a sentence that requires the presence of the accused. And if these beings are imprisoned until judgment, this necessarily means that they return before the judgment is carried out, because judgment requires physical presence. It requires direct confrontation. And that is exactly what the apocalyptic texts describe happening in the last days. The book of Revelation speaks of beings being released from an abyss in the end times. Chapter 9 describes a star falling from the sky, receiving the key to the bottomless pit, and releasing creatures that had been imprisoned indefinitely. These creatures are not described as ordinary demons or disorganized spirits. They have a precise military organization. They have a hierarchy of command. They have a king over them, whose name in Hebrew is Abaddon, and in Greek is Apollyon, destroyer. Revelation chapter 20 speaks of Satan being released from his prison for a short, predetermined time before the final judgment. But the text does not say that he acts alone or in isolation. He gathers the nations of the earth. He organizes one last coordinated rebellion. And all this happens before the absolute end. Now place this alongside the Qumran manuscripts, specifically the Book of Giants, which was found among the Dead Sea Scrolls and complements the narrative of Enoch. This text describes the giants, sons of the Watchers, having terrifying prophetic dreams about their own impending destruction. But it also describes that before the complete end, there will be specific and recognizable signs: wars on a global scale, widespread famine, massive religious deception, false messiahs rising up, and a return of ancient forces that had been contained since the days of the flood. This is not generic modern apocalyptic fantasy. It is a consistent narrative pattern that runs through texts from different eras, different languages, and different cultures. And they all point to the same central thing. Something that was imprisoned will be released in due time. And when that happens, it will not be a completely new invasion. It will be a return, because they have been here before. Because they have intervened before. And because they left consequences that were never fully resolved. This content is unusual. If you want to see it produced in this way, subscribe to the channel now. Future videos will delve even deeper into each of these points in a more detailed and interconnected manner, and you won't find this explained in such a systematic way anywhere else. This type of analysis requires access to the original text and a willingness to connect sources that are normally kept separate. But now we arrive at the point that no one wants to discuss openly, and that completely changes the understanding of this narrative. If these beings have been imprisoned since the flood, why do the texts consistently suggest that they still have influence over earthly events? The Book of Enoch states that the spirits of the giants, the Nephilim, were not imprisoned in the same way as their Watcher parents. They roamed the earth as evil, disembodied spirits, causing moral corruption, physical illness, and war among nations. Enoch chapter 15 verses 8 to 12 makes this completely explicit. The physical bodies of the giants were destroyed in the flood, but their spirits, being hybrids between celestial and terrestrial, remained bound to earth without a body. And these spirits have no rest. They have no peace. They have no dwelling place. They operate simultaneously in the visible and invisible worlds. They influence thoughts. They seduce through promises. They corrupt through gradual deception. This is not medieval Christian theology or an invention of the Middle Ages. This is in the Ethiopian text that has been preserved as sacred scripture by a Christian church uninterruptedly since the 4th century. And when you place this alongside Ephesians chapter 6 verse 12, which speaks of a spiritual battle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of this dark world, against spiritual wickedness in high places, the pattern continues to confirm itself. There is a complete spiritual hierarchy operating behind the visible physical world, and this hierarchy is not neutral. It is not passive. It is active. It has specific plans. It has defined objectives. And its ultimate objective, according to all these connected texts, is to prevent humanity from returning to the original divine authority established at creation. Because if man was originally made in the image of God, but was corrupted by the intervention of the Watchers, then the real battle is not about physical territory. It is about spiritual identity. It is about who has the legitimate right to rule the earth. And it is about who will be in control when the appointed end times come to their fulfillment. Mesopotamian texts clearly state that the Anunnaki left Earth at a certain point, but promised to return when the time was right. Sumerian tablets describe a specific moment when they will return, when signs in the sky are seen by all peoples. The Enuma Elish text speaks of a cosmic cycle that repeats itself in specific eras. It is not presented as a single isolated event. It is presented as a recurring pattern. And here is the most important detail that connects all this to the biblical narrative. The biblical apocalyptic texts describe exactly the same preceding signs. Matthew chapter 24 speaks of wars and rumors of wars, famines, plagues, earthquakes in various places, false Christs rising up, and specific signs in the sky. Luke chapter 21 speaks of signs in the sun, moon, and stars, and of nations in complete perplexity, not knowing what to do. Revelation speaks of seals being opened sequentially, of plagues being released in order, of specific creatures being released from ancient prisons. And all this happens before the final and definitive return. But here's what almost no one connects properly. If the Anunnaki are the same beings described as Watchers under Mesopotamian names, and if they were imprisoned until judgment as recorded in Enoch, then their return is not a modern alien invasion in the contemporary sense. It is the fulfillment of an ancient decree. It is the moment when they are brought back to face an established sentence. But before the sentence is fully executed, they have one last permitted period of action. And it is during this specific period that the final and most powerful deception occurs. Because they don't return openly saying they are the fallen and judged Watchers. They return presenting themselves as saviors of humanity, as benevolent creators, as returning gods, and humanity, without knowledge of the preserved ancient texts, receives them as such without question. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 speaks of a deception so powerful and convincing that, if it were possible, it would deceive even God's own elect. It speaks of supernatural signs and lying wonders that seem completely real. It speaks of someone who sits in the temple of God, presenting himself as if he were God himself. This is not described as a purely human figure with delusional pretensions. It is described as someone whose coming is according to the working of Satan, with all power, signs and lying wonders, and with all unrighteous deception. Now connect this carefully with Gnostic texts, especially the Nag Hammadi manuscripts discovered in Egypt in 1945, which speak of the archons. Beings who govern the material world, who present themselves as creators of humanity, but who in reality imprison humanity in systems of control and ignorance. The Gnostics did not call these beings demons in the popular sense. They called them cosmic rulers, archons, and they firmly believed that these rulers literally fed on human ignorance about true divine origin. The more humanity forgets its true divine origin, the more power these beings have over it. And here is the final connection that closes the circle. If the Anunnaki presented themselves as creators in ancient Mesopotamia, if the Watchers presented themselves as bearers of superior knowledge in Enoch, and if the Archons present themselves as rulers of the cosmos in Gnostic texts, then the pattern is absolutely clear. These beings, regardless of the cultural name they receive, always operate through the same basic strategy. They present themselves as superior to humanity. They offer knowledge that seems liberating. They demand worship or recognition in return. And then they imprison those who follow them in systems from which they can no longer escape. And if they are about to return, as the texts indicate, they will not come with a terrifying appearance that causes immediate fear. They will come with a glorious appearance that causes awe. Because the greatest deception possible is not the one that frightens and repels. It is the one that seduces and attracts. Now, the narrative needs to delve into the most unsettling element of all, one that is rarely explored even in circles that study these texts. What exactly happens when these beings return? The texts are not vague about this. Enoch describes that when the Watchers are released from their prisons, there will be a final and definitive battle. But this battle is not described as an ordinary war between human armies. It is described as a direct confrontation between cosmic authorities, between those who claim a right to the earth and the one who truly created it from the beginning. Revelation chapter 19 describes Christ returning physically with the armies of heaven to confront the nations gathered under a single world leader. Daniel chapter 7 speaks of thrones being established in heaven, of a judgment being formally opened, of books being consulted containing complete records. And then it describes the specific destruction of the fourth kingdom, the one described as different from all the previous ones, the one that devours the entire earth, tramples, and destroys everything. This kingdom, according to consistent traditional interpretation, is not merely human in nature. This is the ultimate manifestation of a structure that has always been operating behind human empires throughout history. And if you connect this with the Mesopotamian texts that speak of Enki trying to save humanity from the flood by creating Utnapishtim, the Sumerian equivalent of Noah, you realize something fundamental. These beings have always tried to subvert the established divine plan. They couldn't completely prevent the flood, but they managed to preserve their genetic lineage through means that are not fully explained. And this lineage, according to the text, remains to this day in forms that are not immediately recognizable, because the giants were not completely eliminated from the earth after the flood. Numbers chapter 13 speaks of the sons of Anak living in Canaan. Deuteronomy chapter 3 speaks of Og, king of Bashan, whose iron bed was 9 cubits long and 4 cubits wide, approximately 4 meters long. Joshua chapter 11 speaks of the destruction of the remaining giants in Canaan. But the text makes it absolutely clear that not all were completely destroyed. Some fled to Gath, some hid in the mountainous regions. And if this lineage was never completely eliminated from Earth, it means it could resurface when conditions are right. And when it resurfaces in the modern context, it will be interpreted by contemporary humanity not as a spiritual threat, but as a biological or technological evolution. Apocalyptic texts speak of something happening right now, something rarely connected to ancient narratives. They speak of a specific time when knowledge will increase exponentially, but wisdom will decrease proportionally. Daniel chapter 12, verse 4, explicitly states that many will rush to and fro and knowledge will increase in the last days. This is not about neutral and beneficial progress. It is about the massive accumulation of information without the necessary discernment to use it properly. And when you carefully observe what is happening in the world now, you realize that this is already underway at an accelerated pace. Advanced artificial intelligence, CRISPR genetic modification, immersive virtual reality, transhumanism as a philosophical movement. All these technological movements have something fundamental in common. They promise transcendence of the current human condition. They promise immortality through technology. They promise that human beings can become more than they are biologically. And this promise is absolutely identical to the promise the serpent made in the Garden of Eden recorded in Genesis. You will be like God, knowing good and evil. Genesis chapter 3, verse 5. The exact same promise, the same fundamental seduction, and the same end result. Because what appears to be the elevation of the human condition is actually imprisonment in new systems. When humankind tries to become divine through technology or forbidden knowledge, it does not approach God. It progressively distances itself because it is trying to achieve through created and limited means what can only be achieved through a direct relationship with the transcendent creator. And that is exactly what the Anunnaki, the Watchers, the Archons have always wanted from the beginning: to make humankind believe that it can save itself, that it does not need God to transcend, that it can become God through its own efforts. And when this mentality becomes culturally dominant, humanity does not realize that it is being systematically prepared to receive those who will present themselves as the true original creators. Because if you believe that humanity was created by ancient alien genetic intervention, then you do not need a personal, transcendent creator. You just need to wait patiently for the advanced scientists who will return to show us the next planned step in directed evolution. But here's what the texts make absolutely clear without ambiguity. The return of these beings is not to elevate humanity to the next level. It is to judge it for what it has become. Because what they did in the distant past generated irreversible corruption, and the direct consequence of this corruption, according to the texts, was the flood as a purifying judgment. But the flood was not an isolated event without precedent or consequence. It was the first global judgment, and the texts clearly state that there will be a second global judgment, not with water this time, but with purifying fire. 2 Peter chapter 3 verses 5 to 7 makes this completely explicit. The ancient world perished, drowned in water. The present world is reserved for fire until the day of judgment and destruction of ungodly men. And this fire is not described as a natural event resulting from global warming. It is described as an intentional divine judgment, as a complete purification, as the definitive removal of everything that has been corrupted since the fall. If the Anunnaki, the Watchers, the beings who intervened in ancient human history, are about to return as the signs indicate, then what is happening now is not the beginning of a new golden age. It is the end of a complete cycle. And everything they did in the past, everything they corrupted, everything they tried to subvert from the original plan will be brought completely to light. Because their return is not to rule eternally, it is to be judged publicly. And those who consciously allied themselves with them, those who believed their seductive promises, those who accepted the knowledge they offered, will be judged along with them in the same judgment. Because the problem was never knowledge itself considered abstractly. It was the source of knowledge and the purpose behind its revelation. And the only source that does not bring inevitable corruption is the established divine source. The texts speak of something specific that happens immediately before the final judgment is executed. They speak of a clear and definitive separation. Matthew chapter 25 describes the parable of the 10 virgins, 5 wise and 5 foolish. The wise ones were prepared with sufficient oil. The foolish ones were not adequately prepared. And when the bridegroom arrived unexpectedly at midnight, those who were ready went into the wedding feast. The others remained outside knocking at the door. Matthew chapter 13 speaks of the parable of the separation of the wheat and the tares. Both grow together in the same field until the final harvest. And at the appointed harvest, the tares are separated first and burned. The wheat is carefully gathered into the barn. Revelation speaks of a seal being placed on the foreheads of God's servants before the final plagues are released upon the earth. And it speaks of a mark being placed on those who worship the beast and its image. 2 distinct marks, 2 separate groups, and in the end, only one survives the purifying judgment. But here is what is absolutely important to understand without distortion. This separation doesn't happen through accumulated human merit. It doesn't happen through accomplished works. It happens through a conscious choice of authority. You choose under which authority you live your life. Under the authority of those who promise knowledge, power, and immortality through created and technological means, or under the authority of the one who created everything from the beginning and who promised to restore what was corrupted. Because what the texts make absolutely clear is that there is no possible middle ground. There is no neutrality in this choice. Either you are consciously under the established divine authority, or you are under the authority of the rebels who rose up against it. And the rebels, no matter how glorious they may seem when they return, no matter how much supernatural power they publicly demonstrate, no matter how many convincing promises they make, have already been judged beforehand. The sentence has already been decreed in the celestial records. They are only waiting for the public execution of that sentence. And those who consciously choose to follow them will be physically present when that execution happens before everyone. The return of the Anunnaki, if that is the name you prefer to use for these beings, will not be the beginning of a new golden age for humanity. It will be the visible fulfillment of an ancient sentence that has been established since the flood. And the texts that have been called forbidden, the texts that have been systematically excluded from the Western canon, the texts that have been preserved only by isolated traditions like the Ethiopian Church, all of them consistently warn of the same fundamental thing. There is a set moment when everything that has been hidden will be publicly revealed. There is a specific moment when everything that has been corrupted will be completely purified. And there is a set moment when those who rebelled against the divine order will face the eternal consequences of their rebellion, and humanity will have to make a conscious and definitive choice. Because the final deception will not be a crude and easily identifiable deception. It will be a sophisticated and convincing deception. It will be presented as advanced science, as directed evolution, as benevolent contact with our original creators, as humanity's necessary next step. But behind this seductive presentation lies the same promise that has always been present since Eden. You don't need God to transcend. You can be like God through knowledge. And those who believe in this ancient promise will discover, too late to change, that the price of this belief is the loss of the only thing that truly matters eternally: the restored connection with the true source, the connection with the one who does not promise power through gradual corruption, but complete restoration through purifying judgment. Because divine judgment is not merely random destruction, it is also intentional liberation. Liberation from everything that imprisons humanity. Liberation from everything that progressively corrupts. Liberation from everything that systematically deceives. And the texts make it absolutely clear that when this judgment visibly arrives, there will be no doubt about who was right from the beginning. Because the false glory of the Anunnaki, the Watchers, the Archons, will be instantly consumed by true and eternal glory. And what will remain will not be the deceptive knowledge they offered. This will be the truth they have desperately tried to hide for millennia. The truth that authority over Earth was never rightfully theirs. It always belonged to the original creator, and those who consciously choose to live under that authority will discover that the final return is not a threat to be feared. It is an ancient promise being fulfilled exactly as it was recorded. If this video fundamentally changed how you understand this topic, like it now. Share it with someone who needs to hear this perspective. Subscribe to the channel because the next video will delve even deeper into what exactly happens after this return and during the trial. And leave a comment about which specific part of this script impacted you most deeply. This type of connected content isn't produced anywhere else in this systematic way, and it only continues to exist if you show that there is real interest and genuine engagement in it.